Hello, very good afternoon to you from Westminster, where MPs are debating for a second day this afternoon a bill that would allow the Prime Minister formally to start the process of leaving the European Union. Well, the government is expected to win the vote on the legislation when it's held this evening. That's at 7 o'clock, about 4 hours from now. And the government's expected to win pretty comfortably, despite opposition from some Labour rebels who are going against Jeremy Corbyn and his three-line whip, plus opposition too from the Liberal Democrats and the SNP. Well, we've been hearing more impassioned debates this afternoon, as we did yesterday. Let's hear a segment of it from the former Chancellor George Osborne.
The truth is that while Britain is seeking the maximum possible access to the single market for goods and for services, and while we hope that the fact we have a trade deficit and a very important financial centre will count in our favour, the government has chosen, and I respect this decision, not to make the economy the priority in this negotiation. They have prioritised immigration control, and that was a clear message from the referendum campaign, and they've also prioritised removing European Court of Justice jurisdiction from the United Kingdom and, in that sense, asserting parliamentary sovereignty.
So that was George Osborne, the former Chancellor, in the debate this afternoon. Now we've also been hearing from Alex Salmond for the Scottish National Party.
The importance of Scotland's European connection stretches back a millennium, and we are not going to allow this non-vision act of madness from this House take Scotland out of these connections. The Scottish Government have put forward the proposition Scotland's place in Europe, which offers the Prime Minister a way that Scotland should stay within the single marketplace, regardless of what she wants to do to this country.
Tulip Siddiq has been explaining her reasons for resigning from the Labour front bench ahead of the vote for triggering Article 50.
This decision has not been easy. It's been a haze of conflicting emotions as we decide what to do in the Labour Party. But for me, there were two main reasons why I made the decision I did and why I will be voting against the bill today. The first decision has been made because of the future of the EU nationals living in my constituency. There are 17,000 EU nationals living in Hampstead and Kilburn. And some people have accused me and told me that I only want to be elected at the next election, which is why I'm taking this stand. Let me tell you, those people can't vote for me at the next election. The reason why I'm taking the stand I'm taking is because in Hampstead and Kilburn, we do not wince when we hear people speaking in a different language on public transport. We do not blame the very real pressures on our health system, on our criminal justice system, and on our housing by scapegoating others just because they do not look like us and because they do not sound like us. In Hampstead and Kilburn, we do not indulge in baseless theories that our country is at breaking point. In Hampstead and Kilburn, we celebrate these EU nationals. They are a part of our fabric as much as everyone else, and they have a right to be here as much as the successive generations that came before them. If I vote for this bill today, I am abandoning my responsibility to these EU nationals who live in my constituency. And for lack of time, I will go on to the next reason why I'm voting against this, because of the lack of access to the single market. This affects three main groups in my constituency: the self-employed, who have argued that they need tariff-free trade with the EU; those who are involved with the scientific and technical industries, because in the last 10 years, the scientific funding has increased by 73% from EU sources, and at this point, their projects are in jeopardy. And finally, no, I will not give away, and finally, those who are involved in the financial and insurance service, who have no clarity over the future of their passporting rights. These are the reasons why, in good conscience, I cannot vote for the bill today. And finally, I will quote my friend, my honourable friend from Leeds Central, and say, this is not how we do things in the House. We need clarity. We need to see the economic impact of this decision. And in good conscience, and for the sake of my constituents, whether they can vote for me or not, I will not be voting for this bill today.
That's Tulip Siddiq for Labour, just explaining why she's voting against this European Union bill that would trigger Article 50 and why she's defying her leader and the three-line whip from Jeremy Corbyn. And Let's go to our chief political correspondent, Vicky Young, who's just behind me inside the Palace of Westminster. And Vicky, this is the kind of debate in the Commons where all MPs want to make a speech. I think 100 spoke yesterday. They've really been queuing up to have their say.
Yeah, absolutely, and many do believe this is one of the most important things that's happening to this country. Now, a lot are making the distinction by saying, of course, this is about the process, this is simply triggering the start of those negotiations rather than what kind of deal, what kind of Brexit we have. But you can hear there people like Tulip Sadiq really wrestling with their conscience. She won't be the only Labour MP to defy her leader. We expect there to be a rebellion on the Labour side, and there will be resignations and sackings from the Labour front bench. Anyway, let's discuss this a little bit more. I'm joined by Neil Carmichael from the Conservatives and Kate Hoey from Labour. Now, you were on different sides in the referendum campaign, but you will be voting the same way tonight. You as a Remainer, why are you doing that?
Well, I'm voting for Article 50 tonight because I think that we have to respect the fact that we lost the referendum and that there is a majority for the start of a process to leave the European Union. But thereafter, I am absolutely determined to make sure that we do the best for Britain by ensuring that we've got good contacts with the European Union and that we leave all options open, because ultimately if things go badly wrong we will need to pull back from the precipice.
Okay, Hoey, not surprising that you will be voting to trigger Article 50 after you campaigned for the UK to leave. Are you concerned? Theresa May has said that if she doesn't get a good deal, she's willing for the UK just to leave, go back onto World Trade Organisation rules. And she's talked about really becoming a tax haven. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think anyone going into a negotiation, something as important as this, has to leave all the options open. Otherwise, you're playing into the hands of the people you're negotiating with. I mean, we've seen many of the EU countries playing really hardball and saying very sort of nasty, damaging things. So I don't think we will get to that stage. I'm quite hopeful that actually we will get a good negotiation, which is why I want to get on with it and why voting tonight to trigger it, to start the process. We'll have the amendments next week, some of which I hope the government will accept. We'll then be able to get on with it. And, you know, that is really what is going to end the uncertainty and all the negativity that's around, and we can start being positive.
Are you being too gloomy about the prospects? We heard from Sir Ivan Rogers today, the former top diplomat in Brussels. He seemed slightly concerned. He said that we might get a bill for £60 billion to exit.
Well, that would be quite a big bill, but I think what we've got to concentrate on is the kind of deal that we should have, and I think we need to be sure that towards the end of the two-year process, Parliament can look at what's happened, and I think it's very important that we can vote on something and actually vote on the quality of what is before us. And I also think that we've got to be ready between now and that time to seize on any opportunity to put Britain into the best possible position so that we can secure the right kind of deal for our future.
Yes, I heard Sir Ivan this morning because I'm on that committee, and he actually wasn't quite as definite as that. He said there's been no detail. He expected the Commission to come up with these wild figures. And in fact, in a question from some of us, he did almost agree that we do have the opportunity eventually to say, well, sorry, but we don't agree with this and we're not paying it.
He said that the first thing they're going to argue about is what do they argue about? I mean,
Yes, I know.
do you think things are going to go smoothly?
Well, he was very good, actually, and he made a really good, interesting discussion. And I think a lot of us felt that, you know, if we hadn't been voting to leave, after listening to him of what was going on in there, we'd be wanting to vote to leave. So, yes, I mean, it is going to be a serious negotiation, but I do feel that we have to give and trust our government now. And that's why I want to see the party, the Labour Party. We have different views on what will happen after we leave, but I want to see the Labour Party now being positive, getting involved, getting supportive, and actually showing a united front for our country.
I mean, Theresa May has ruled out being in the single market, so what do you think is the next best option as far as you're concerned?
Well, some form of customs union, and as I said in my speech yesterday, some sort of associate membership status that we might be able to get later on when Europe itself may well reform. And I think that's the sort of thing we should keep a lookout for, because these are great opportunities, not just for Europe, but certainly for us. And I think that to sort of focus just on a narrow definition of where we should be would be a mistake right now.
I think we're going to see a lot of changes in the European Union, other countries over the next year, and you know what we've done here and shown that people did get their say and that we're going ahead with it, I think will be a catalyst for a lot of changes within the European Union Commission, because they know that if they don't change, other countries are going to follow us.
Cowie and Neil Carmichael, thank you very much indeed. And you can see really the debate here starting to move forward, because if these negotiations get started April, maybe sometime after that, that is where the focus is going to be, on what kind of deal Britain can get as it leaves the EU. Back to you, Ben.
Vicky, thank you very much indeed. And we're joined here now outside Westminster by another Labour MP, Wes Streeting, who's, we think, planning to vote in favour of the bill. So not a rebel, but you are a Remainer. Just give us your thinking.
Well, I think I decided pretty much immediately after the referendum that, having voted in favour of having a referendum and having passionately campaigned for Remain in my constituency, on the airwaves, in the palace behind me, on the Treasury Committee, the fact is we asked people a simple question about whether they wanted to remain in the European Union or leave. And I've reached a judgment that, taking into account the very principled debate that's taking place in the House of Commons this afternoon, that having asked people to give their verdict, they have given us an instruction, and I think it would be a devastating blow to our democracy, frankly, if we didn't accept the result of the referendum. And I think the debate now needs to shift to what kind of relationship we want with the European Union, how we position our country to succeed outside of the European Union. But that debate is about how we go about Brexit, not whether it should happen, because that decision was taken in June last year.
But on that, you've tabled an amendment, I think, for next week. But surely any kind of amendment is just playing around with this, when the decision of the British people is very clear. They just want to leave, end of story.
Well, actually, there's a hugely vast range of complicated issues to work out in terms of our future trading relationship, economic and security cooperation, whether we still work together on issues like tackling climate change, what happens with EU citizens living in the UK, what happens with Brits living abroad, a wide range of issues. And it's quite right that Parliament wants to scrutinise these issues. We were told the referendum was about taking back control. And so I think the Prime Minister needs to be very clear that the House of Commons will be in the driving seat. And there are a few key issues she needs to address. Firstly, people voted to leave the European Union, but people welcome our trade with the European Union, and she doesn't have a mandate to leave the single market. And she certainly doesn't have a mandate to drive the economy off a cliff. So it's right that Parliament should decide our future relationship on a trading basis with the European Union. Similarly, every single parliament across EU member states, including the European Parliament, will get to vote on a deal. And at the moment, there is no guarantee that our Parliament will have a vote on the deal before they do. And I think if we're serious about parliamentary sovereignty and genuinely believe in the role of democracy and the role of this Parliament in taking key decisions, the Prime Minister's got to give us that commitment. And those are just two of what I think will be a huge number of issues debated next week, frankly, with not nearly enough time to work through those issues in the depth that we really ought to be.
So just briefly, you're going to vote with your party leadership. You're not going to rebel, but quite a few Labour MPs are. Have you got any idea how many of your colleagues may rebel?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's... this is a difficult one, and I don't think for colleagues I've spoken to, whether they're voting in favour of the bill or against, isn't about the party whip or Jeremy Corbyn, who I think has taken the only position he really could, given that 2/3 of Labour constituencies voted to leave, a significant number of Labour votes, and of course a majority of the public. Actually, what people are doing is really thinking about how this sits with their conscience. And some colleagues, for perfectly principled reasons, have said that they campaigned passionately to remain in the European Union, their constituencies voted to remain, and that's how they're going to vote. Others have made a different judgment about the democratic principle. And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, and I think it's totally right that people on issues like this vote with their conscience and go with what they believe to be right. And I'll be voting in favour of the bill and respecting the result of the referendum, but I respect my colleagues who are making a different choice.
Wes Streeting, good to talk to you. Thank you for your time, very much indeed. Just to say, the debate will continue this afternoon. We'll be bringing you more highlights from it through the afternoon, and then the voting starting around about 7 o'clock this evening. 3 separate votes, one on timetabling, one on an SNP amendment, a reasoned amendment as it's called, but the key vote, which the government is expected to win quite comfortably. Simon and Anita, back to you.